All right. Just a reminder, we do have the computer science get together tomorrow afternoon at 4 p.m. That's going to be probably an S118 B. I do plan on making my in-person comeback for that. I've been mostly better since like Sunday or so, just since I'm still coughing a little bit. I haven't had face-to-face meetings on campus. I figured I'll not cough around people if I don't have to, but I'm not coughing as much anymore. So I think I should be safe on campus, and I'm not sick with anything. I've already had a zillion negative tests and all that stuff. Something with allergies and voice, I believe. So make sure you have that in your calendars, 4 p.m. They usually order pizza, sandwiches, things like that. I know we got some good prizes. If you guys see Professor Josh Locklear in the halls or something soon, or maybe even tomorrow, he just finished defending his dissertation, so he is now officially Dr. Locklear. So feel free to congratulate him or call him doctor or whatever. I'm sure we'll make some sort of announcement tomorrow. So we'll have to downgrade Dr. Gary Locklear so we don't get confused. Maybe we'll make him Professor Locklear. We'll see. All right, so let's look at the homework assignment. It sounds like this one was a little bit more difficult than some of the previous ones. Is that an accurate assessment? Sounded like, based on the questions I got, a lot of people kind of struggle with it.
I'm not gonna lie, I submitted the thing and then somebody asked me for help and I realized I did it completely wrong. So yeah.
Wow, what do you mean you did it completely wrong? Like it doesn't do what it was supposed to do, or you did it in a different way?
No, I did it in a different way. So I guess maybe my brain just like checked out for like the 30 seconds between when you wrote the homework and what you said, but I just had it go through and delete random rooms every time they collided. Like it went through and it went down to, yeah.
I see. So whenever the player and the enemy hit each other, you just went through and randomly selected one of the game objects and destroyed it.
Yes.
I gotcha. Yeah, that's way easier to do it that way. All right, so let's look at this. So the idea here, just as a review, and let me make sure my Unity is still running. Is this my project? Yeah, it's mine. I was debugging a bunch of students' projects yesterday, so I didn't remember what we had up. Okay, yeah. So right now when they collide, I just have bucket, whatever was at bucket 0 disappearing. So what we want to have happen for the homework assignment is we want to have so like for instance, right now I'm the player. When this player leaves the room, he's leaving this room and he just collided with this other whatever we called it, room collider, room trigger, whatever it was, which is associated with this room. We want this room to disappear, which then makes my jump mechanic very necessary since you won't have a room there. Although I guess you can just skate across the floor, so it's not going to necessarily stop you. But the idea is that as a enemy or a player leaves a room, we want that room to be destroyed. So how do we know they've left a room? We know they've left a room when they enter another room. So the moment that we know that is when they collide with a room trigger. Before we update them to their new room, we want to consider their old room. Okay. So a couple different ways you could have accomplished this. Let's just go into the code and look where. So here is our room trigger script. So right now, when a player or an enemy enters into collides with a room trigger, we are setting this room's player equal to something. So when we set the player for a room, we're getting the current player. We set the enemy, the room's enemy, we're getting it to a certain enemy. So let's go and look at set enemy for room and set player for room. All right, so in set enemy and set player, we are just immediately overriding the enemy. And then we are changing, we're setting this enemy's room to this room. Similarly with set player, we're overriding the player for this room, and then we're letting the player know that their set room is a new room. All right, so now let's follow the yellow brick road here. Let's just follow player. So let's go to player and look at set room. So here's player. Here's set room. We are overriding whatever their current room is. And their current room is a room object. All right, so we have to decide what kinds of information are we going to store inside of this stuff. So right now, when a room object is created, it's just created. Let's go back to, I think it's our room script, right? Here's our room object. When a room object is first created, here, room trigger maybe. Yeah, so here in the room trigger, this is where the room is actually created. So that's our instance of room. And then we're adding that instance of room to our core. So if you remember from core is holding a collection of several different things. We're holding a collection of game objects, which is our room goes, and that should happen from our room script. So right at the beginning of room script, and we actually could do this inside of awake if we wanted to. But we're adding the game object that is our room. This is the actual guy we want to have disappear. We're adding this guy to our game object, or to our core's collection of room game objects. So now the issue we have here is inside of room trigger script, when we enter a trigger, remember those triggers, go to my room prefab here. And we'll turn the room trigger back on just so we can see it. So the room trigger is the white box thing there, but we want all of that to disappear. All right, now who has the room script? The room script is the top level room here, not just the room trigger. All right, so we have to have a way of getting both the room that they're in, this whole physical room, as well as the trigger that is associated with them, connected to the connected to core, so we know what to destroy. Because at this point in time, and this is what Hunter was saying. Oh, I'm gonna discard the changes because I don't want to have that guy modified. Go back to my code. At this point in time, I think we have it in player script when they collide. Yeah. So when a player collides with an enemy, we're going ahead and saying we want to destroy some game object. What game object? Whatever get room gives us. So for core get room right now, we're just always returning bucket 0. So what he did is just put a random number generator in here and returned one of the rooms from this game objects thing. So it was no longer a problem. So I mean, I guess we can look at that real quick. What was it? Random dot.
What I did was actually a bit different. It wasn't random. I just went through and I did like a counter.
Okay.
And so through that counter, I just went to the next one in the list and just deleted that one.
Oh, so it wasn't even random. You just literally went through one by one.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So that's even easier, right? So that's just having a private static int counter. You start off at 0. So you did something like that. Remember when the plus plus comes after counter, it gives you this value initially and then increments. So the first time this will be 0, then 1, then 2, then 3, so on and so forth. So if I run this right now without changing anything else, now whenever they hit, random room should start disappearing. It should only happen up to 3 times, since that's when the enemy then disappears. All right, but we don't want to have that happen. We want to have a whenever a player runs into a, let me just make sure I look at how I said it. Yeah, whenever a player or an enemy leaves a room, we want something to happen. All right, so let's go and look at how do we detect that a player or enemy leaves a room. A player or enemy leaves a room. I'm going to switch this back just to 0 so I don't forget it. We know they left a room whenever we interact with another trigger. Now we need to have 2 separate things happen. So whenever we enter into another trigger, that means we know that we just ran into a different room, which means the old room is the room that should get destroyed. Right now, it is with our trigger that we are having this room object get created and added to start. Let's see, are we ever using that in here? It does not look like we are. So what I'm going to do, it's a starting point here, is I'm going to remove that from my room trigger. For now, we'll see where this is going to end up going. Otherwise, we have to play this little bit of a timing game, which we can do, but I think this will be better. And I'm going to go ahead and actually, let me look at this real quick. Oh, we are using it here. That's fine. So we're going to play the timing game. So our room trigger knows about our room object. Our room script knows about the game object that we care about. So when we add that game object, and let's do this on awake. That will we have it happen as soon as possible. We'll also have this happen on awake. So presumably since a room prefab, when this guy first wakes up, not only will this script wake up, but also the room trigger script will wake up all in one fell swoop. So what we want to do, wasn't it awake? Oh, I already have it in two separate things there. So we're going to add two different game objects to core. We have our room game objects, which are the full rooms. And then I want to have a private static list of game objects. And this will be the room trigger goes. And this will be a list of game objects there as well. All right, so I'm going to keep track of two separate lists. And these lists are going to be, I'm going to call them parallel lists. That is, whatever's at bucket 0 of one is related to what's at bucket 0 of the other. So on and so forth. So we have a add room go. We're going to also have a public static void add room trigger go. And this will take in a game object. The room triggers go. Okay, so we want to add our room game object as well as our room trigger game object to two separate lists so that now this is going to be based on timing a little bit, and I'll talk about that when we get down towards the end of this. But we're going to add our room game object to this list, our trigger game object to this list, but now bucket 0 of this list is the game object associated with a trigger at room 0, trigger 0 of this list. Game object 5 here is associated with 5 here. Okay, so we're able to look for a certain game object, return an index, and then ask this guy for that index. So let's go and fill it up first. So whenever a room is created, we're already adding that game object to it. Whenever a trigger is created, we'll add the game object associated with this trigger. So that's just going to be that that cube. All right. So now we're keeping track of both of those pieces of information. Go back here as our player is going through this world here, or as our enemy is going through the world. Every one of these rooms, the room is stored in core as well as the trigger is stored in core in two separate lists, but where bucket 0 of one list is equivalent to bucket 0 of the other list, and so on and so forth. So now what we want to have happen is when an enemy or a player enters another room, we want to have the room they just left get destroyed. So how do we know about the room they just left? Well, if we go back to player, a player currently knows about the room they were in. A room only knows about the player that's in it or the enemy that's in it. When are rooms first created? They're created when a room trigger first awakes. So when I first create this room, I'm creating it with no parameters. Can I teach a room how to hold on to a game object? Can I go into room here and say private game object, call it maybe current room trigger. And then when room is created, we'll create it with a game object. Well, yeah, it's fine. Call it current room trigger. And we'll say this dot current room trigger is equal to current room trigger. So now when I'm creating a room, I'm creating that room with the, not just setting the player and the enemy to null, but I'm also creating it with the trigger that's associated with that room. And we know about that trigger because in room trigger script, we created the room inside of that guy. So that means when we create that instance of room now, it's expecting a parameter. The parameter I'm going to send it is this game object. Now, actually, with that in mind, we didn't even need to store the triggers up here since we're already storing the rooms inside of core, but we'll leave it for now. We actually have the two different ways of getting at our triggers inside of core at the moment. We can get to them directly from our list of triggers, or we can get them indirectly by going through our list of rooms and then asking each room about its trigger, which is actually probably going to be the way that we're going to do it anyways. Well, we'll see. Okay, so now that's the information that's being stored. We've increased what our room knows about. So now with our room trigger script, as a player or an enemy enters a new room, okay, and these guys know about the rooms that they're in. When they enter a new room, we want to have the old room that they were associated with disappear. Well, if we go into room and we say we're setting the enemy for a room, or we're setting the player for a room, before we tell that player they're in a new room, we can go ahead and destroy their old room. So after this line, well, let's see, between these two lines, there's like this transition. The first line there lets a new room know about the player. So at this point in time, a room knows about this new player, whereas the player doesn't necessarily know about their new room yet. They don't find out about their new room until this line right here. So we have an opportunity inside here to access the old room the player was in. Same thing with the enemies. So if we wrote something inside of core, maybe we call this guy, here, I'm going to write it up here, get room. Let's call this guy get room go given trigger. And this guy will take in a game object trigger as a parameter. And what we want to do is, wonder, can we destroy? Yeah, we can destroy him here. Let's make this void. We'll just destroy it right here. So we're going to tell core to destroy a room game object given a trigger. Let's call it given room trigger. So we're going to give it that room trigger. And then what we need to do is we need to search through our list of room triggers, looking for the trigger that is room trigger. So index of room trigger is going to be equal to, we probably have this built into lists. So I'm passing this pointer, so that's a memory address. I'm passing it to the room trigger list, and they have a method called index of, which returns an integer of the position in that list where that guy lives. So now I have that position. And then I want to say destroy core dot the room goes at bucket index of room trigger. I want to keep using the word core there. So what am I doing here? I am looking up the room trigger in my list of room triggers, finding its location in there, its index, and then using that index to find the actual room associated with that to destroy. Since the guy's now been destroyed, I'll go ahead and say the room's trigger goes dot remove at index. I'll remove index of room trigger. And then I'll do the same thing. Here, so after I've destroyed it, I'll go ahead and take that game object out of both of those lists. Probably not necessary to do that for what we're trying to get to happen here, but might as well clean up the mess. If the room's gone, we no longer need the trigger or the game object associated with it. All right, so just to show you something here, if you remember index of from Java, index of in Java returns the position in a list where the given value first occurs, or a -1 if it's not found. So we know that this room trigger is going to exist. So we're going to look it up inside of here. If you didn't want to use a built-in function like this, you could have just written a for loop. You could have said for int I is equal to 0, I is less than core dot the room triggers dot goes dot what is it, size count I plus plus, and then you could have said if core dot the room trigger goes at bucket I, if that guy is equal to our room trigger, then do that. You know, so you could have searched through and looked for it yourself if you wanted to, but there happens to be a function that returns the first occurrence of this thing inside of this collection. All right, so now we put in an ability in core where we could ask core to destroy a room game object given the trigger. So now, if we go back to room, as we are setting a player to their new room, letting the player know about their new room, we have access to their old room. And remember, rooms now know about current room triggers. So the player's current room does have a room trigger associated with it. So I can give myself a getter, public game object, get room trigger. Current room trigger. All right, so this will return the room trigger associated with a room. Now we need to make sure a player can hand us their room. So a player has a room associated with them. we have the ability to ask a player for a room. So go back to room here. When we are setting the player, we could say room player's current room is equal to p dot get room. That's the room the player is currently in. All right, we're about to override that by letting the player know that they're now in a different room. But at this moment in time, on this line of code, we still have the old room, the room that the player is just leaving. And now we could say core destroy room given trigger, player current room, get room trigger. So we'll ask the room that the player is currently in to give us the room trigger associated with that room. How do we know about that room trigger? Because that room was built inside of room trigger script. So inside of room trigger script, we built this room, and we built it with the room trigger as a parameter to the constructor. So we're gonna ask core to go ahead and destroy a room given a room trigger. We're gonna pass him that room trigger. Core is gonna go through, it's gonna find out where is that room trigger located in my list of room triggers, and the position he's located in should be the same position in the list that my game objects are listing, since they were added at, I'm going to say they were added at roughly the same time. This does become a little bit of a speed type thing, but I think we've seen from Unity that an entire game object is processed at once. So since both of these things happen from the same game object, I think this should come out where they're the same. Otherwise, we'll have to take a little bit different approach, but I'm pretty sure this should work fine. All right, so figure out where in the first list is the trigger. Let's say it was at bucket 5. Then go ahead and destroy the game object from bucket 5 from my game objects. And then I'm just cleaning up and saying, look, I just destroyed something. So let's just go ahead and get them out of the list. They're not important anymore. Whether I did that or not wouldn't actually have a make a change in the outcome of this thing. All right. So when we're setting a player, we'll go ahead and get that player's thing and then destroy the room. Does an enemy have the ability to give us their room yet? Enemy does not. So let's teach an enemy to give us their room. Public room, get room.
Sir,
Sure, go ahead.
is there any reason we're using an enemy class and a player class rather than just using a generic parent class of like character?
Well, we certainly could. We originally did like an inhabitant before. The main reason for that for us right now is because we just added enemy real quick last class. We just threw it in there to kind of control our enemy. But you're right. Maybe good programming practice would say that enemies and players have a lot in common with each other. Where right now a enemy keeps track of a room, a player also keeps track of a room, and then a couple of other things. So we could have an inhabitant class that keeps track of the room, and then a player differentiates themselves by having a name and a kill count, something like that. So you're not wrong. We certainly could and maybe should do that. These are simple enough objects right now that it's probably a tie goes to the runner type situation, where we're really not having too much duplicated code. So it's maybe not the end of the world, but it's the right kind of thinking.
Gotcha. I just wanted to find out if there was a reason why we shouldn't.
Yep.
Thank you.
So we're going to teach our enemy how to go ahead and let us know about their room, so that inside a room here, we can say enemies current room is equal to e.get room. And then we can say core dot destroy room given enemy's current room dot get room trigger. So that's the room trigger associated with the current room that the enemy's in before we put them in a new room. And we're gonna ask
Where was
core-
that? Where was that get room trigger getter declared?
that is inside of room. Where's room?
We're in room right now. That's why I was kind of confused.
Oh. Right here.
So then why do we need a getter for it if we're using it in the
Yeah,
class?
you actually would not. You're right. Since this guy is private, he's only accessible from within the room class. And we are in the room class, so we could actually just get current room trigger directly. Yeah, you're right. Given the way we're using it right now, since we are using it from within the same class, we don't need the getter. The getter doesn't hurt, but you're right. All right, so whenever we are setting a room's enemy, the room will take it upon themselves to go ahead and destroy the previous room the enemy was leaving before they let the player know they're in a new room. So they're going to utilize the player's current knowledge about the room they're in to destroy it. Well, in this case, the enemy, the current knowledge the enemy has about the room they're in to destroy it, and then destroy the room. Same thing for set player. The room will use the current knowledge the player has about the room they're just leaving to destroy it, and then let them know about the new room they're in. All right, and then lastly, in room trigger script, where are we currently doing our destroy? I think it's in the player script. Yeah. So player script, we're no longer going to do our destroy in there. In fact, that method doesn't even exist anymore. Get room. All right, so now it's going to be handled totally by the room trigger script. So whenever a trigger is entered and we start setting the player for a room, that room takes care of the heavy lifting of destroying the room the player or the enemy is leaving. Go see what this looks like. And we should be able to even just watch on our enemy as our enemy starts traveling towards us. Rooms behind them should just start disappearing. Oh, compiler, what do I got? Room. Here's my constructor for room, takes the game object. So this is in room trigger script. There's no argument given that corresponds to the required formal parameter current room trigger of room. I am giving you that argument. I guess it just had to load its scripts again. Okay, so this is during runtime. This is that same stuff where we need to move things into awake. So this is in set enemy. Object reference, so set enemy line 21. in room. It's saying that guy doesn't exist yet. Our enemy is our box script, right? Okay, that's happening on awake. Oh, wait a minute. We might not be giving all that information to our enemy like we were for our player. Might just be making the assumption that the player and the enemy are doing the same thing. Let me just start having my player lead rooms. All right, the player doesn't know about these either. All right, same issue. So it's a null reference. Go back to when it happened the very first time. So it's line 21. We were just looking at that. In room, line 21, we're setting the enemy's current room equal to that enemy's room. When does an enemy's room get set? Enemy knows about their current room. Are we ever setting their current room the very first time? It should get set on room trigger script. The first time an enemy drops into a room, we're setting this room's enemy to this. Oh, it's just the very first time that we're getting the error. So the very first time in, let's assume we're an enemy. We just dropped into the first room. We are colliding with our room trigger. What does that say do? It says set the current room associated with the room trigger, which does exist. Set its enemy equal to the current enemy. Okay, so we'll go into room. We're setting a room's enemy. This is the code we just wrote. So the very first thing we're doing is we're letting the room know about this enemy. Fine, no problem. But then we're asking that enemy to get their current room. And that enemy doesn't actually have a current room. Because it was never actually set. So what we need to do is we need to like ask a question here. If e dot get room is not equal to null, then do this stuff. That is to say, if the enemy was previously in a room, then destroy it. If he was not previously in a room, and this is the first room he's entering, then don't try to do any destruction type stuff. And we'll just set that enemy's room. And we'll do the same thing for set player. If p dot get room is not equal to null, and I know we're out of time, so this should hopefully this should up. It is interesting that it's removing different rooms. Not the room he just left. which might mean we do have a timing issue, like I was saying, where the indexes aren't necessarily equal to each other. Okay, well, we'll look into that. Looks like the players' room maybe. Oh, who even knows? We'll look into what are the actual positions being added. We might have to just create our own object that holds both pieces of information so that we make sure they both get added to the same index. But largely the logic here is doing what it's supposed to do, and we have strange rooms disappearing. All right, so no homework for Friday, since I'm not giving you a good starting point for your next one. We'll get this patched up and we'll go from there. Questions, comments, concerns, bribes? All right, I'll see everybody. Well, hopefully I see all of you tomorrow at 4 p.m. for the CS get together.
I don't know if mine worked, so I don't know how mine was different, but every time the
Yeah, so it's entirely possible yours does work. That even further gives credence to my idea that it could be a timing thing, you know, because the idea is that I'm adding the trigger to a list in a separate call to when I'm adding the room game object to a list, with the assumption being that those two guys would both be added to bucket 0 of their respected lists or bucket 3 of their respected lists, when it seems like what's happening is while I'm adding a game object at bucket 0, I'm adding a trigger that's a different trigger to bucket 0. So that's why they're not corresponding with each other, when my intent was for them to correspond with each other.
Gotcha.
Not necessarily sure why yours is doing it, not mine, but you know, this kind of comes down to the trustworthiness of how we can expect Unity processes its game objects. So the best course of action would be to ensure that we literally add the two game objects at the same time, not just hope they get added to the same position of the list, which is what we're doing right now. We're just hoping.
Sounds good.
All right. Have a good one.